All right, welcome back again to New Hope Bible College video class. This is the Genesis class, the third video in the series of Genesis that we've started because of the coronavirus. I hope everyone is doing well, hope everyone's staying safe, staying home. Hopefully, prayerfully, very soon that we'll be out of this mess and back in class together. I sure do miss each one of you being here. Hope you're missing the classes. Hope these classes, though, are doing you well at your homes. I hope you're able to study, to learn from these videos. Again, as I've said before, any questions, make sure that you get them to me. I'd be glad to address them through the video or through text if you need to, but whatever the question might be. Last week, we left off with the patriarchal blessings of that was pronounced upon Jacob and Esau. Both actually would receive a blessing from their father. Jacob, of course, though, getting the primary blessing because that's what God had intended. If you remember, the scriptures are very clear that the elder shall serve the younger. Even though they're twins and their births were very, very soon apart, not much time at all. Esau technically is the older, but Jacob is the one to receive the birthright. It's what God had intended. Why is that? We can only speculate to a certain degree, but God knows the future, and I'm not saying that God causes everything that's going to happen. I don't believe that. The word sovereignty is misdefined in religion today. Like people who believe that the sovereignty of God means that everything that takes place is taking place under the command of God. If that were true, then all sin would be under the command of God, and of course that is just not the case. Sovereignty means that He is God, that He is to be worshipped, and He is the Lord of all. But even as the Lord of all doesn't mean that all His people will follow after Him. Some will reject Him completely. Some in this world, those are not His children. But even some of His children, all of His children, after we get saved, we still have free will. And so the Bible doesn't tell us that God calls these, but God does know certain things. And so with the Jacob and Esau, we see that God chose Jacob over Esau. Malachi talks about, told Israel, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. Now, does that mean God rejected Esau from the very beginning, hated him? No, you have to read that in the proper context. And it's so important when you look at these two men in the Bible. Because the context of Malachi is not that God hated him and rejected him as an individual. If you look at the context of the passage in Malachi, you can get a chance to go and read it, but it talks about Esau have I hated and laid his mountains. It starts talking about the geography of the land, that God hated Edom. He loved Israel and he hated Edom. Why? Because Edom rejected God and God chose Israel, who had accepted him. So it wasn't a matter of one finding salvation and the other being rejected. It's that as a nation, Edom rejected God, God rejected them, as will be the case in the judgment of nations that will come up at the end of the tribulation period, right at the beginning of the millennial kingdom. So as individuals, does Esau have a chance to get saved? Absolutely. Did Jacob have a choice? Absolutely. And so we know what Jacob did choose. We know Jacob, though, for most of his life, really didn't choose to follow God in the way that God wanted. And so here with the birthright that Isaac is going to pronounce upon his two sons, last time we looked at the patriarchal blessing here, and we see that Jacob would be prosperous. Esau's descendants would serve Jacob's descendants. We see that as a promise of God. We also see that in Genesis chapter 9, the sin of Canaan, cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants shall he be. And we see that was fulfilled in Joshua chapter 9 because of Israel's failure to do what was right, but because the Canaanites, they would not be servants to them. But it's also very much part of the Abrahamic covenant. And one day, of course, Israel will be the nation of all nations in the world during the millennial kingdom, where Jesus will rule and reign from Israel. Other nations would serve Jacob's descendants, and of course that's true, and it will always be true. That God would bless those who befriended Jacob and curse those who cursed him. And that is the world that we are living in even to this day. all nations that go against Israel are going to be chastened by God. And those nations that support Israel will be blessed by God. Now, it doesn't mean that they'll be a Christian nation or anything to that degree. It just simply means that God will bless them in whatever ways that He sees fit to bless them. But it is very important to understand that this promise was given to Abraham, passed on to Isaac, and then passed on to Jacob. And Jacob, of course, his descendants became that nation as they came out of Egypt and go back into the promised land and into the land that formerly was Canaan, which is now Israel today, and not Palestine. The land of Israel should never be referred to as Palestine. The word Palestine only appears a couple of times in the Bible, 3, 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. One time as Palestine, a couple of times as Palestina, maybe 4 times. But you can look it up. But every single time that word Palestine or Palestina is used in the Bible, if you look at the root word, it's Philistine, Philistia, which was part of the, today would be right at Golden Heights, not Golden Heights, but the Gaza Strip area, near Tel Aviv, near the capital of Israel today. But it's not Palestine, it's always Israel. Isaac here learns from Esau what Jacob had done to him. Of course, we talked a little bit about last week as far as the deception between Rebekah and Jacob, and then Isaac and Esau. The whole problem there with Esau being preferred by his father, Jacob being preferred by his mother, and the plot that Rebekah has, that she's afraid that Esau's going to get the birthright. Even though she knew God's plan, she still did not believe it. She did not apply the proper faith to the circumstances. And so she had her son trick his father by going to him with goat hair attached to his arm, so that when his father touched him, and father heard the voice, it was Jacob's voice, but he touched him and said, well, but you are a hairy man. So Esau must have been a very hairy man. If you can put goat skin on your arm and somebody touch it and think that's your natural hair, then yes, absolutely a very hairy man. But the deception, that's the whole problem, is the deception that took place here. Now Esau, of course, is upset, and Esau comes to his father. He also had made a savory meat and brought it to his father and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's venison. So Jacob got there first. Now Esau comes with the venison, thinking that I'm going to get the birthright. Well, Isaac's father said to him, who art thou? He said, well, I'm thy son, thy firstborn. I'm Esau. And Isaac trembled and thought, okay, something's wrong here, something's going on. Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him, yea, and he shall be blessed. For whatever reason, this birthright, once given, the promise that was given in Isaac's mind anyway, and definitely didn't play out that way, is that he believed once he gave that birthright, that was it. And there's nothing to do about it. He could not change that birthright. And Esau heard the words of his father, and he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, bless me, even me also my father. Where's my blessing? Well, he said, thy brother came with subtlety, and have taken away thy blessing. Again, that's not a true statement. Remember, it's not true because God already said Jacob would be the one. But he said, is he not rightly named Jacob, for he has supplanted me these 2 times. He tricked me. Name Jacob means supplanter, or we could say even tricky, deceiver. It's a good name. It's actually the same name today that we use. The meaning is James. Jacob is an Old Testament name. James is a New Testament name. And so it means deceiver, but it also shows the grace of God. That's why it's even such a great name today. I named my son Jacob for that very reason, because it shows the grace of God, how God can take all of us, being deceivers, and make something out of us. And Jacob, of course, his name was changed later on to Israel, meaning prince with God, or prince of God. And so it shows the grace of God. But he said, he's tricked me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he's taken away my blessing. He said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? So do I get anything out of this? There's nothing left for me. And so Isaac does pronounce a blessing upon Esau, a modified blessing, not the same, obviously, as what Jacob would get. But he predicted that you're going to have a hard life. And of course, that is exactly what happened to the Ishmaelites, Arab people. Very hard life. They live by the sword, and that's what they are, even to this day, are still doing. All the problems in the Middle East stem from what happened in biblical times. And that for a while he would serve his brother, but eventually be loosed from him. And that is true. It happened in the past there. Now today, of course, they are not obviously servants of Israel. Very much hate Israel more than anyone else. I mean, the Muslim religion, Islam, teaches that the death of any Jew, if you kill a Jew, that you go to heaven. If you kill a Gentile, you go to heaven. So, very much a religion based upon hate, in spite of what the world says today and how we're supposed to be tolerant and accept everyone. Well, I can't accept anyone who believes that it's okay to kill somebody and to make your way to heaven. It's just not what the Bible teaches in any way whatsoever. Doesn't mean we speak ill of people that are Muslims. We treat them with respect, like we would treat anyone of any religion, no matter what they are, of any sin that they're committing, because you're not going to win anybody to the Lord if all you do is spout out hate towards them. You encourage them as people, not in what they believe, but you encourage them to come to know Jesus Christ as Savior. And that is to truly show love. But the only way you're going to be able to witness to them is by dealing with them in a very good way. So I'm not saying preaching hatred here of individuals by any means. I'm not doing that. What I'm saying is that we should totally disagree with what Islam teaches and encourage anyone who has been in Islam to come to know Jesus Christ as Savior, to teach the gospel of love, not the gospel of hate, as Islam does teach today. And I know there are some people in Islam who don't believe that as far as the extreme of it. They don't believe that killing people is the right thing to do, and I understand that. But that doesn't make their beliefs any better, because they still denounce Jesus Christ. There's only one mediator between God and men. That's the man, Jesus Christ. Not Muhammad, not Joseph Smith for the Mormons, or Charles Russell for the Jehovah's Witnesses, or any other religion out there, man-made religion. Only one way, and that's through Jesus Christ. And that's why it's so important that we serve Jesus Christ, that we love people enough to tell them about him. Isaac answered and said to Esau, Behold, I have made him thy Lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants. And with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said to his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And of course, the Muslim people today, obviously, number-wise, outnumber the Jews. In the Middle East, somewhere like 1 billion, 1.1 to 2 billion Muslims in the world. Middle East is more than half of that. Israel, we're talking 6-7 million Jews. So definitely they are not servants to Israel in any means whatsoever. Isaac, excuse me, right there, but the vision here of Jacob. Isaac realized that Esau was planning to kill Jacob. I'm sorry, let me back up here a minute. This is what I hate about the videos, and don't have anybody to video me, and pause it for a second. But let's go with real time here. This is what we're looking at. Isaac here realized that Esau did not like what happened. He didn't like what happened with the birthright, and that he's taking out his revenge upon his brother Jacob. And so he called for Jacob. Of course, the blessing was given to him. And he told him not to marry a Canaanite. See, Esau, at the age of 40, marries a Canaanite. And Isaac did not want that to happen. Rebekah did not want that to happen to Jacob, to marry someone of a false religion. And told him that he needed to choose a wife from his family, from Rebekah's relatives there at Padan Aram. And he prayed Jacob would eventually return. and possess the land. Eventually Jacob would go into the land, Padan Aram. There he would meet Rachel, Leah, Laban, their father. They end up spending a total of 20 years in Padan Aram before he makes his way back to Israel, and is there for a while until the famine becomes too great and he ends up going into Egypt here. But we have here the vision here of Jacob on his way up. Jacob goes to a place, a city called Luz, L-U-Z. Luz means separated. And it really pictures Jacob and Jacob's relationship with God at this point. Even though he does agree to go up and to the family there. I don't know if he goes because for a desire to marry one of the same religion, or more a desire to get away from Esau. And that probably is the case at this point. But Jacob, when he gets to Luz there, he does have an encounter with God. A wrestling match, a very unique situation here for Jacob. This is what we would call a Christophany. Remember what a Christophany is. A pre-Bethlehem appearance of Christ. Jesus appeared several times in the Old Testament with Joshua as the captain of the Lord of Hosts, with Abraham there at the plains of Mamre. A few other cases in the Old Testament where Jesus appeared, God appeared. Some would say a theophany, an appearance of God, and I would say, yes, a theophany is correct, but a Christophany is much more specific because the manner in which God has always appeared is through Jesus Christ. The New Testament tells us that no man has seen God at any time. Well, if that's the case, seeing God the Father, well, he's a spirit. We can't see a spirit. And so the only way that man has ever seen God is through the manifestation of Jesus Christ. And so therefore, all theophanies are Christophanies. They are one and the same. So I would go more with the Christophany definition rather than the theophany, because the Christophany gives the exactness of what really took place here. But he had encounters here, the angel Lord realizing that Esau had planned to kill Jacob. He was sent away by Rebekah and Isaac. Jacob was sent away by them. And so there it says, Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father. Take thee a wife from thence the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee, make thee fruitful and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people. Thus fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant. I will bless him and bless thee, and curse him, curse thee. And all the nations of the earth shall be blessed upon thee, be a father of a multitude. So the blessing here is shown again. And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padan Aram unto Laban, son of Bethuel the Syrian, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. So there's the plan to go out. They advised him to get a wife out of the city of Nahor again. Yes, this is close family members, cousins at this point. Not the plan that God has for today by any means. It's not right for people to intermarry so closely within the family. But in biblical times, because there was much less people in the world, God allowed that, and eventually God would condemn that incest relationships. But then God appeared to Jacob on the road here, and in his dream he saw a stairway, a ladder. Jacob's ladder is what we refer to it as. Stairway would be probably the more specific understanding of what that word ladder is talking about here. But nevertheless, it's a ladder, stairway resting on the earth, and its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on it. So it has this great dream here. Verse 12, and he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set upon the earth here, and the top of it reached to heaven. And so he saw the Lord of the angels in chapter 28. God here again confirms to Jacob the Abrahamic covenant. And that's a great significance of this again, is that yes, God gave it to Abraham in Genesis 12, confirmed, Abrahamic covenant confirmed in Genesis 15. God then has Abraham pass it on to Isaac, and then Isaac passed it on to Jacob, the first, the one to receive the birthright. And God confirms this, that God would make Jacob a great nation, that God would give the land of Canaan to Jacob's descendants, and that, of course, is what would happen. Hasn't fully taken place yet. The reason is because Israel did not become what God intended for them to be. They followed God at certain times, but for the most part, they rejected Him. And so that, even though this will be fulfilled, because it's an unconditional covenant, you remember, that God gave in Genesis 12 and 15, where He ratified that covenant. If you remember the story there, the sacrifice and the animals laid down in a path, and Abraham passed through by himself. God passed through by Himself. And Abraham didn't have a part, making it an unconditional covenant. And here again, this is what's going to happen. And someday the Messiah would come and bless all the nations. And that's the Abrahamic covenant. Bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee, in Israel, from Israel, shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And that is because Jesus is a Jew who came from Israel to be the Messiah of all people. That was what God wanted. And the promise here, the vow of Jacob. Jacob, when he gets to Luz here, and that again, that word Luz means separated, if you recall. And so it shows kind of the spiritual attitude of Jacob at this point. But when he gets here, the name of Luz is going to change from Luz, separated, to Bethel, meaning the house of God. Beth, B-E-T-H, is house, and then E-L is God. Later on, and we'll talk about it when he comes back out, but later on, after 20 years spending in Padan Aram, and Jacob actually comes back down to Israel, eventually he goes back to Bethel, and he refers to it not as Bethel, but as El Bethel, E-L, Beth, B-E-T-H, E-L. So you have El in front as a prefix, El on the end as a suffix with Beth in the middle, meaning the God of the house of God. Here it's just the house of God. And we can illustrate this today, how that is so important for us to go to the house of God. Well, I guess we can to a certain extent go to the house of God. Our churches right now, we are having services on Sunday morning, but we're sitting in our cars individually. So we're not coming together. We are going by the social distancing thing. But we are coming to our parking lot, and we're hearing the word through our radios in our car. The pastor is preaching on an FM station, and we're receiving it. We can't come together in fellowship at this point, but we're coming to the house of God, which is good, but coming to the house of God doesn't make you right with God. It's more important to come to the God of the house of God. And a lot of times people think if I go to church, everything's going to be all right. No. Going to church is great. It's wonderful. But it's not going to make things right with God. Going to God, and truly going to God, the God of the house of God, that's when things will be right. Well, Jacob here does. There he sleeps. He takes a stone, sets it up for a pillow. And later he would set it up as a pillar to God. He then named the place Bethel, meaning the house of God. And he promised here, and I'm not so sure about this, that here he's putting a requirement on God at this point, and we ought not do that. We are to claim God's promises, but we don't put our requirements upon Him, telling that God, if you do this, then I'll do that. But nevertheless, this is what Jacob did, and so he promised God that if God would take care of him, that he would tithe. Well, so he said, give him back a tenth of all he possessed. Well, we're to tithe. Not to test God, we're to tithe to prove God. God said He would bless us if we did the right thing. We do the right thing, God blesses with our tithe. But more than that, not just giving God 10%, but giving God our heart, our attitude, the right attitude in serving Him. Very, very important that we do that. Jacob here's love for Rachel. Jacob arrived at Nahor here at Padan Aram, and he meets Rachel, and he falls in love with Rachel at this point. She comes to the well with the father's sheep, and very importantly, read chapter 29 of Genesis to see the full story here. And Jacob rolls away a huge stone from the entrance of the well for her. So immediately he falls in love with her at this point. I'm going to get to this screen. I'll back up to the other screen in just a minute. It's kind of interesting chronology here of Jacob, because sometimes in our mind we have a certain picture of what these people looked like, or the situation took place, how old they were. A lot of times people put Jonathan and David as maybe two best friends growing up, schoolmates, what have you, and that's why they had that close bond. When Jonathan actually was probably around 20-some years older than David, be more like a father figure to David rather than a brother. But we in our mindset sometimes get these wrong pictures here. Well, Jacob and Rachel and Leah's age differed quite a bit. In fact, Jacob and Esau, they were born when Isaac was around 60 years old. Jacob was then about 15 when his grandfather died, Abraham died. Jacob was 40 when Esau got married, and so Jacob's still not married at this point. Actually, several years later, 37 years later, would Jacob leave Israel, or Canaan at that point, I guess, and end up going up to Padan Aram. So he was actually 77 years old when he leaves for Padan Aram. So here at Luz, he's 77. 76, 77 years old at that point. He's in 84 when he marries Leah. You remember he worked for her 7 years and then worked 7 more years for Rachel. So how old was Leah when he met her? The Bible doesn't tell us the ages of these, but she probably was relatively young. She's probably quite a bit younger than Jacob was. And Rachel was even younger than her. How much, we don't know. Again, the Bible doesn't tell us. A lot of times people will speculate and think that Leah may have been around 20 years old when she met Jacob, and Rachel about 19 years old. And Jacob spent a total amount of 20 years in there. So we really don't know. But, like I say, he's 77. They're, let's just say, in their early 20s. And that's probably exaggerating a little bit. So kind of a strange society, cultures that is so far different from ours. And we try to impose our culture sometimes upon the Bible, and thinking that the way things work today is the way things worked back then, and that's not always the case. And we have to be very careful about that. That's why it's so important that we do study these things very in depth in the Bible to find out truly what happened in the Bible rather than what we think might have happened. But nevertheless, Jacob was in 91 when Joseph was born. He was 97 when he left Padan Aram, because remember he spent 20 years, 77 to 97, 20 years in Padan Aram. And then about 3 years later, Benjamin was born, and of course Rachel died, Jacob being around 100 years old at that time. He was 120 when his father died. Joseph, around 29 at this time. He was 130 when he went into Egypt 10 years later. And then spent about 17 years in Egypt, so being 147 years old when he died there. So, and an interesting chronology. You may not have thought about this, you may have not given this much thought, but it's kind of interesting chronology here as to the life of Jacob here. There's a lot more we can go into and a lot more passage we see as far as the chronology of the age of these individuals there. So backing up here, we do see Jacob's proposal to Rachel. We know what happened there. He fell in love with her. And he agreed with Laban to work 7 years for her. And we know the story that he did serve 7 years for Rachel. And they seemed unto him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. And of course, we know what happened when the wedding finally did take place, the deception here by Laban. If Laban had been an honorable man, he would have mentioned this as a prerequisite that Leah had to be married first. We don't even know if that's true, that Leah actually had to be married first. This may have just been a way that Laban got back at Jacob. And kind of think about this, though, is the law of retribution. You remember, like it says, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. Jacob grew up as a deceiver. Deceived his father, his brother, others. And now he's getting deceived. So maybe a little payback to him. Not that God caused Laban to sin here, but the irony here behind what takes place here. Laban substituted Leah for Rachel. I've heard many stories, heard many preachers listen to the radio not too long ago, and this preacher talking about Leah, how that she was the ugly sister and Laban could not get her married off because she was so unattractive, and that's why he tricked Jacob into doing what he did. No, the Bible doesn't say that in any way whatsoever. She may have been just as beautiful as Rachel, could have even technically been more beautiful than Rachel. It's just that Jacob loved Rachel. That was the deal. So it's not pitting one against the other. And that's a very, I think it's a wrong way of imposing our beliefs again into the Bible. Trying to make the Bible say something. Because this whole sermon that I heard, the outcome of the sermon basically was that Leah was ugly and Rachel was beautiful. I mean, that's pretty much all I got out of that sermon. And of course, that's not the point of the passage in any way whatsoever. But Laban explained here, and his idea was that the custom to give the younger daughter, it was not their custom to give the younger before the elder. So, again, very, very sad situation there. Laban deceiving Jacob. Jacob, though, does love Rachel, and he agrees to work for her after fulfilling her week. It says, fulfill her week, and we'll give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so, fulfilled her week, and gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife. Then he agrees to work the 7 years. Jacob did so, fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel. Well, I got the same verse up there. Verse 29, it continues on. Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter, Bilhah, his handmaiden, to be her maid. All right, thank you for viewing this. I know this video is a couple of days late, and I do apologize for that. There's just a lot of circumstances here. But hopefully the next videos will be posted by Monday. My goal is to do that. I appreciate your patience during this time. Very difficult to video. I don't have a computer that works very well. It takes forever to video, to upload. And all that, but I appreciate your patience, and I'm not making excuses. I'm just giving you some reasons why they're a little bit late here, and it's my fault. I will try to do better. I hope you have a good day. Again, be safe. Pray for one another. Pray for the college here. Pray for myself. I do ask that you would do that. Just thank you so much for allowing us to do the classes by video. I know it's not the way that any of us wanted it in the beginning. Thank you.